afternoon. Can you hear me? All right, I can just about hear myself. All right. Let's start with a word of prayer, and then we will go into our program. So just bow your heads with me. Dear Father and God, as we speak this afternoon and consider the plight of our young people and indeed our church, we ask that you will be with all that transpires this afternoon, both here in this room and in the various parts of the campus, that your name will be lifted up and children and young people and all of us will be drawn closer to you. Be with me now as I speak, for we ask these things in Jesus' name. All right, so it's a real pleasure to be back in Ireland. And I say back in Ireland because some time ago I was in Ranelagh, the church in Ranelagh. So a little bit of what I'm going to say is part of that, but a little bit more, and we will proceed with that as the days go on. So I've been asked to speak on the topic of true education. True education. So I'm going to give you a little bit about myself, and then we will go into the topic. So my name is Lorraine McDonald. I am the wife of one man. They always say that, the husband of one wife. So I've reversed it. Wife of one man. And I'm the mother of 4 children, 4 adult children who all attended Adventist primary school. All right? They didn't have the luxury of going to an Adventist secondary school, mainly because it was too far away from where we live in the heart of England. We're in the Midlands. So this is my husband and our 4 children, who are now all adults working for themselves. And though they are children, we have a saying in the Caribbean culture. I don't know if there's any Caribbeans in the room. When they're small, they tangle your feet. But when they're old, they tangle your heart. And that is true of young. So they're always your children, regardless of how old they become. All right, so a bit about my background. I have been in education for over 34 years. I have taught primary, secondary, and tertiary in various forms. And I've taught in our Seventh-day Adventist schools as well as the public schools. Part of my career was spent training teachers to be teachers, and I've been also an examiner for A-levels. I'm a qualified special educational needs coordinator, so my background is very varied, and God has allowed me to bring all of that experience into our church as the BUC Education Director. I'm very passionate about evangelism and ministry. In fact, if I wasn't a teacher, I'd be a Bible worker. That's how much I love evangelism and ministry. I love to study the Bible. And if you get me started, you won't be able to stop me. But I'm also a radio presenter. So this morning you probably didn't see me in the room as I was in my bedroom presenting Sabbath School on the radio station that we have in the UK. hopefm.org.uk. You can get it here. hopefm.org.uk. I present the Sabbath School on a Sabbath morning. So my role as the BUC Education Director is quite extensive, mainly because I'm the only one in the union with the responsibility for education. There is nobody at the conference level anymore, the North England Conference or the South England Conference. Neither is there anyone in the missions. So there's no one in Ireland, in Wales or Scotland. So my responsibility is mine to look after our schools. Part of my responsibility is also to support teachers who are members of our church but work in the public sector or the mainstream sector. Then I have the responsibility of looking after families who have their pupils in the mainstream sector. And that may apply to most of you here, as we don't have any schools here in Ireland any longer, and some of you hopefully are part of the home schooling or the home education community. And then so I do some work with those, with the Home Education Society, certainly the ones in the UK, in England, I'm sorry. And then I have responsibility for the local education, church education leaders. Now, I know that you're representatives of various churches. Can I see if in your church, whether you are the person or not, is there an education leader in your church? Only one. Two? Okay. And it's a problem for us. It's a problem for us because we are trying to promote Adventist education when there's nobody in the local church to promote it. So that poses us with a problem. But we could spend a lot of time talking about that, but we'll press on. So the education department has a mission, and I won't spend too much time talking about it, but our strapline, as you can see, is educating for eternity. That's what we are focused on doing. And so part of my responsibility is to ensure that our schools deliver outstanding education. And we do that through training and teaching. As I said, my background is part of teaching teachers and leaders. And so part of my role is supporting the schools in that way. Then we want to create an enabling so that children can learn and develop their key skills and enhance their potential. But we would add to that to develop a faith model for all our schools. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as I move on. We have 3 values that I focus on. That is delivering quality. I will tell you about a survey in a moment. And one of the things that have come out of that survey is that parents want quality education. Yes, they want a biblical education, but they also want quality education. So delivering quality, we are creating potential in the children and potential in the teachers and hopefully potential in our leaders of our schools. And then lastly, leading transformation. So we want that our schools are places of transformation, both academically, but more importantly, spiritually, that our children are being led to Christ as a result of our schools. So that's what the education department, in a nutshell, what we are trying to achieve. Now, some of you may or may not have seen that we have been running a survey. And although I've collected a lot of data, I've got quite a bit there. If you've not participated in the survey, do take out your phones and scan the QR code. This survey is not just for parents. It is for SDA members or anyone that's involved in our schools, in our church rather. We want to know, what do you think about Adventist education? What is your expectations? Because we are looking at the future of our schools. As Amari's already told you, there were 3 schools here in Ireland, and our schools are no longer. What is behind that? Was it because of cost? Was it because of quality? And the survey has brought out lots of findings that we are working on to make sure that we deliver, as I said, high quality, biblically based education. So I can see a few of you still snapping that. I'm going to move on to the next screen. But we do want you to respond to the survey. The more that you talk to us about it, is hopefully the better we can meet some of your expectations. I'm also trying to track all of the Adventists who work in education. So if you are in the room or you know people who are teachers, lecturers, learning mentors, teaching assistants, anything to do with education, we want to know about you. And we are, as part of my role is there to support those who work in education, but you are in the mainstream sector. And you are facing sometimes challenges, having to teach things that you are perhaps not comfortable with teaching. You may be finding yourself being stressed by the amount of work, having worked in the classrooms for quite a few decades. it is a lot of work. And so I know that the needs of teachers are great. And so we are, through the Adventist Educators Association, trying to find out who you are, where you are, and see ways in which we can support you. And what we are hoping to do is hold a weekend retreat for everyone that's working in education, so that we can come together, share some of our needs and our concerns, and see how best we can support you. And so whether you are a nursery teacher, whether you're work in the office, you're a bursar, you're an education psychologist, anything to do with education, please sign up to our Educators Association. We'd love to hear from you. All right, a little bit of a moving away from the department so much now, a bit of a did you know. Some of you may or may not have seen this before, but I'd like to share this with you. How many of you knew that the Adventist Church runs the largest Protestant school system in the world? Put your hand up if you knew that. The Catholics have the largest school system, but in Protestantism, or even just in faith groups altogether, after the Catholics, the Seventh-day Adventist Church runs the largest school system in the world. In the world. I'll play a little video to show you.
The whole person principles of the Seventh-day Adventist Church are grounded in the biblical view of how God created us, an inseparable integration of mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Pioneering Adventists realized from the beginning formal education was the ideal way to nurture this concept and develop the talents and characters of students while preparing them to serve others, at home, across the country, and throughout the world. Today, Adventists operate the largest Protestant educational system in the world, with nearly 8,000 schools, from preschools to universities, in more than 100 countries. Battle Creek College, today Andrews University in Michigan, was the first Adventist college, founded in 1874. And in 1896, Oakwood University in Alabama opened to educate recently freed African Americans of the South. Challenging the sentiments of the time, Edson White, son of Adventist church pioneer Ellen White, built a riverboat and organized trips down the Mississippi, offering education to the underserved Black community. Andrews University has grown and now attracts undergraduate to doctoral students from around the globe. U.S. News & World Report ranks Andrews University as one of the most culturally diverse universities in the nation. A major focus of Adventist schools is training new generations of healthcare providers. The first medical school took root at what is now Loma Linda University in California, a world-renowned center for medical education, innovation, and research. Other medical schools dot the globe, operating in Mexico, Peru, Argentina, Nigeria, and the Philippines. Adventist hospitals also train future health professionals. Adventist University of Health Sciences in Orlando, a part of Adventist Health System, is just one example where the whole person philosophy of care is translated from textbook to life. In small classrooms and expansive campuses, from Malaysia to Ukraine to the Native American nations of the United States, 93,000 teachers are helping 2 million students achieve the highest standards of education, learn healthy living, develop Christ-centered values, and change the communities where they will live. And now you know another piece of the whole story.
So as I said, some of that data, the video is a little bit out of date, but this is the current data as of 2019. We are near over 9,500 institutions across the world, from tertiary right down to kindergarten school. We are delivering Christian education. And I've asked this question before, so some of you may know the answer. How many SDA schools do we have in the UK? If you heard me ask the question before, please don't answer. Those of you who have not. Let's throw out a number then. How many Seventh-day Adventist schools do we have in the UK? I hear 10. I hear 5. I hear 3. And I'll give you the answer. But this is an indication of the problem that I have? We don't know. Our members do not know how many schools we have in the UK. How many colleges do we have? One, yeah, with Newbold, and that's a divisional institution, but yes, we do have Newbold. But we have 7 schools. We have been running schools since, well, I thought it was 1919. I don't know if you can see the writing at the bottom there, but I've been doing some work on the history of Adventist education in the UK, and I learned that we had schools as far back as 1884. We started having schools in the UK. Now, I learnt in my journey from Dublin to County Clare, to Galway, Newmarket, that we used to have more than one school in Ireland. I knew of the one school because I have a plaque in my office at the Union, and I went to the Galway school with Pastor Tony to see the possibility of starting a school. Danny and his wife contacted me some time ago wanting to look at the possibility of having a school in Ireland. You have a fantastic facility in Galway. The problem is we don't have the people there to run the school. That's where the issue lies. But you have a huge facility there. The school that left it, and when they outgrew it, have left it in a very good state, ready for a school to walk in and set up a school. But we need people, we need teachers. And of course, for you over here, those in, traveling to get to that school would be a problem, 2 hours away or more. So it has its issues, but there is great potential there. Having come here to Newmarket, you have potential on this site. You actually have potential on this site. And maybe we can have another conversation another time. Why not start a school on this site? It is a possibility. Might be small to start with, but it is a possibility. You have the grounds to run a school, and run a school that would have agriculture and other things that you could be added to the curriculum that we are encouraged and admonished to run our schools with a work program. So let me not get started with that, because that would take me another hour or so, because I get too excited. But the General Conference has already set a strategic plan. The strategic focus runs from 2020 to 2025. So next year at session, or the year after at session, they will be looking at how they've achieved those. And one of them is the one at the top, that each conference and mission has a 5-year plan to increase the number of Adventist primary and secondary schools. I'm struggling to keep the 7 that we have. Yeah, I'm struggling to keep the 7 that we have. But how could we fulfill this particular KPI, that each conference and mission has a 5-year plan to increase the number of Adventist primary school? Jumping down to the third one, which is 5.9, increase the number of children from Adventist homes and churches attending an Adventist school. Now that becomes very difficult when you haven't got a school in Ireland, never mind in your nearby, the town of Newmarket itself. So that poses a problem. But these are the ambitions that our church has for schools. Why? Because our schools should be an outreach tool. It's not just about education, though as important as it is an outreach tool. And I believe that in the UK, yea, in Europe itself, this has been an undervalued outreach tool. We could be doing so much more with Adventist education. So we're working on that, and we are striving to return our schools to the blueprint that we were given. And my ambition is to see that our schools will become Bible-based, Christ-centered, service-oriented, and heaven-directed. That's the ambition that we have for our schools. That's what we're seeking to do. And as I said, much more could be said about that. but it is the drive of Adventist mission as a church. About 3 weeks ago, I was in France at our college in Collonges, where we were celebrating with the North American division and the EUD and some other divisions 150 years of educating for mission, and we are still striving to do that. So let's go to our subject of today, which is true education. So I've broken it up into 3 areas. Today I'm going to talk about what is true education. Tomorrow I will look at the impact of the digital media on brain development. And you might think, what's that got to do with education? A huge amount. Huge amount. And then on day 3, how we can, on Monday, developing a biblical worldview in the next generation. So what is true education? David Mackay, who is one of the former presidents of the Latter-day Saints Church, says this: true education is awakening a love of truth, opening the eyes of the soul to the great purpose and end of life. He also goes on to say this: true education does not consist merely in the acquiring of a few facts of science, history, literature, or art, but in the development of character. The journalist and poet Anatole France says, true education is the ability to discern the difference between what you do know and what you don't. Martin Luther King Jr. said this: the function of education is to teach one to think intensively and to think critically. Intelligence plus character, that is the goal of true education. Mahatma Gandhi said this: true education is that which proves useful in life and makes you industrious. But one of my favorite sayings is from Ellen White. It is the work of true education to train the youth to be thinkers and not mere reflectors of other men's thoughts. To restore in man the image of his maker, to bring him back to the perfection in which he was created, to promote the development of body, mind, and soul, that the divine purpose in his creation might be realized. This was to be the work of redemption. This is the object of education, the great object of life. The Bible says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy is understanding. Surely this is true education. But notice what we as a church do. Education and redemption are one and the same. That's what it's supposed to be. Education and redemption should be one and the same. So where does education begin? And I like this saying by Ernest Istock. He says this: education begins at home, and I applaud the parents who recognize that they, not someone else, must take responsibility to assure that their children are well educated. Would you agree with that? Yeah. Too often, and I've seen it as a first teacher in the classroom and as a leader in schools, sometimes schools, not just talking about Adventist schools, schools in general, are babysitting places of babysitting. They dump the children, they leave their children with us in the morning and hope to pick them up in the evening, and they have no idea what's happened that day. And if you ask your teenage child, what did you learn at school today? They will say, nothing. You know, that's what teenagers do. They just grunt back at you. They don't really have, 6 hours a day, and they've said they learned nothing. All right? But parents are we have the responsibility to ensure that our children are well educated. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone should be home educating, which that is probably an ideal. But I understand, I know, we don't have an Adventist school here. They're probably not appropriate schools that you would want to send your children to. But the majority of families in our church are still sending the children to public schools. And I'm not going to knock that. What I'm saying is, do you know what's happening in those schools? Do you know what your children are learning? The Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he is old, he will not depart from it. Proverbs 22 and verse 6. But let me ask the question, who is training up your children? Who is training up your children? Who is standing in front of your children every day? And I share this story. Once I was on a placement in a school, and a lady said to me, the colleague I was working with, "Oh, I'm going to see my grandma today." And I thought, "Oh, nice. Does she live nearby you?" I said. She said, "Oh, no. She's dead. I'm going to see my grandma through a medium." And she said it looks like she was going to the shop to buy the groceries. And she is standing in front of children. And I say to teachers, because as I said, I worked in teacher training, nobody teaches in a vacuum. Whatever your value system is, you project that onto the students in front of you. You might try to hide it, but whatever your value system is, the children will pick it up. They will pick it up. So she might talk about speaking to her grandma to the children, as though it's a normal thing to do. And she starts to sow a seed in their mind. Do you understand what I'm saying? Who is standing in front of your children? Who is training up your children? I believe in collaboration. And I believe that we are being asked in our church, in our faith, that we collaborate home, school, and the church. You want to know that whatever you are teaching at home, when they go to school, they're hearing something similar. Or that when you go to church, they're hearing something similar. So it's a collaboration of both home, of three things: home, school, and church. As I said, where does your education begin? It begins at home. And we, the parents, us who are not parents in church, you still have a responsibility. They may not be your children, but you still have a responsibility. Whether you teach Sabbath school, whether it's Pathfinders, whether it's the afternoon program, whether it's the youth camp, whatever it is, we are all involved in raising our children. There's an African proverb that says it takes a whole village to raise children. But I believe we have a crisis. This is what I was trying to mention yesterday. I believe we have a crisis in our church, yea, in Christendom itself. But the crisis in Adventism is what I call a biblical worldview crisis. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. George Barna. He runs the Barna Group. And he looks at all things religious. He looks at and does surveys on all things religious. And he says America has a worldview crisis. Yeah, he's not an Adventist, he's a Christian, but he believes that America has a worldview crisis. And he said, through various surveys that he's been doing for over 5 years, some startling things. So this is his latest, you can find this on the internet, American Worldview Inventory 2024, where he's explained in America's 40-year drop in a biblical worldview and looking at ways to reverse the decline. And this is what he finds out. Now, what I'm pointing out to you now is not what he found about general America. These are Christians in America. And this is what he found. When he first started doing the survey, only 12% of Christians, I'm not talking about Americans generally, of Christians had a biblical worldview. Is that an oxymoron? How can that be? How can the Christians, only 12% of Christians, have a biblical worldview? There's something wrong with that. And the latest figures this year, he's brought them out, that there is now only 4% of Christians have a biblical worldview. The Christians I'm talking about, a 67% decline in that time period of Christians who have a biblical worldview. What he's saying exists now is something called syncretism. Syncretism. 94% of people, Christians, have a kind of syncretism, a blending of different beliefs, religious belief systems, philosophies or practices, and they've made that into one belief system. That's what syncretism is. Yeah? That's what's happening. There's a mix of beliefs in Christendom. A similar thing came out in the UK. Maybe it's more about England. And when we had the survey, the census in 2021, the results came out in 2022. And for the first time, England, let's say, because I don't recall whether it was the whole of the... Do you do the census here? Do you do that? Okay, so it is the UK. So they did the survey, and they found that for the first time, less than 50% of people in the UK, particularly England, which was deemed to be a Christian country, now identify as being Christian. 46%. 46% of people in England, in the UK, identify as being Christian. And you can see on the screen there, 37% don't have any religious belief at all. No religious belief. And they've seen a rise, we'll turn to this screen here, 53% are non-religious, this is the belief there, but there's been a rise in paganism, in New Age beliefs. And I think I said this, I shared it in Ranelagh, but I'll share it here. When they look at the census, they look at various things. And one of the things they looked at was the different boys' names, children's names. And one of the popular boys' names that's now on the rise, the name Lucifer. That has now become a name that people choose to name their boy child. Lucifer. More popular than the name Nigel. Yeah? This is the world in which our children are living in. We have a worldview crisis. We have a worldview crisis. In fact, Barna questions and asks, is Christianity disappearing? I don't believe God is going to let it disappear. He's protected the word of God, though men have tried to destroy it. I don't believe Christianity will disappear. In fact, I didn't put the slide in, but it is still a growing religion across the world. So I'm asking the question today, who is shaping your children's worldview? That's what I ask. Who is training up your children? Who is actually shaping your children's worldview? The Catholics have said, give me a child until he's 7, and I will show you the man. They understand the importance of running schools. In fact, this is their only way, I shouldn't say, this is their primary way of evangelizing. They don't build church, they don't set up tents campaigns, as we like to do. We have a tent campaign. You bring over the American speaker, no disrespect to Pastor McIntosh. And this is how we fill our churches. No, what the Catholics do is they build schools. That's why they have the largest school system in the world. They build schools. And then they do the mass and they run their religious programs. The children are given a Catholic worldview, and the parents come along and hopefully they come into the church. They see the value of Catholic schools. They see the value. So, what is a worldview? Worldview formation is said, we'll talk about what a worldview is. A person's worldview is primarily shaped and is firmly in place by the time a child reaches 13. Okay, this is what the Barna Group have found, George Barna. A survey shows that a person's worldview is shaped more or less firmly by the age of 13. Again, the importance, therefore, of how we train up our children, how we educate our children. So what is a worldview? What is a worldview? Because of time, I won't go through all of it. A worldview is a belief system that shapes one's perception and values and actions. And there are different types of worldview. You can see on the screen there, attitudinal, ideological, religious, philosophical, and so on. And everyone has a worldview. You might not even recognize it, but all of us have a worldview. It is the filter through which we make decisions in life. It's how we see the world. Everyone has a worldview. As I said, it's the lens through which you see and interpret the world around you. It is how you think about the world and answer the important questions of life. Where did we come from and who we are? What has gone wrong with the world? What can we do to fix it? And where are we going? Whether you have a religious belief or not, these are the questions that humanity asks. Everybody wants to know where we came from. Everybody wants to know where we go or where we're going. And we see the problems in our world and want to know how we can fix it. So everyone has a worldview, but children are not born with one. Children are not born with a worldview. It's shaped. It's shaped by various things. It's informally shaped. Sometimes you're not intentionally trying to shape it, but even here as a church, we can or cannot influence the children's worldview. And this is why I say, even though these children may not be yours, you might think, I haven't got children. But you could be influencing somebody's worldview, a child's worldview at that. Yeah? We say values are caught and not taught. What children see and hear is what they reflect. Values are caught and not taught. It's uncritically, you don't sit down and think, oh, I'm going to think that, I'm going to believe that for children. They're not thinking, oh, I might believe that, I don't want to believe that. Remember, it's at 13 that's firmly changed. It's intergenerationally formed. What's happened in your family, particular, passed down from parents to children. It's intragenerational, in other words, through various organizations or specialist interests like churches, where we communicate ideas and beliefs and activities. And it's done over time. And it's done through habits that we form, traditions that we hold. So in our in the Caribbean culture, I can speak of, in the West Indies, you would never walk past an adult and not say hello. It would be deemed as rude. Yes? So these are things that are born into it shape your worldview. And so even now, I wasn't raised in the Caribbean, but my parents taught me that, and so I still feel that way when I see people are older than me. And it's been difficult. When I was working once in an organization, a very senior lady was acting inappropriately, and I had to reprimand her. And I said, look, my culture, I'm struggling with this, because in my culture, I would never be telling off somebody who's older than me. And so this is how our worldviews are shaped, from things that we have, and through our community. So what is shaping the worldview of young people today? Today's children are growing up in what is a very secular society, a very valueless society, a very genderless society. Yes? Where truth is relative. You know, it depends on how you look at it as to whether it's truth or not. It's relative. There's no such thing as absolute truth. It's all relative. Instant gratification. We call it the microwave generation. They want to press a button and it happens immediately. Yes? Do you remember the days? Well, you're as old as I am. You turned on a computer and you left the room and may come back in 2 hours before it came on. Now, if that happens, you'd never buy a computer like that. Yes? You turn it on, and with a nanosecond, you want it to be on. If it's not operating in a minute, you're throwing it away and buying a new model. We are the microwave generation. Instant gratification. But it's also a merciless, compassionate-less society. You just think about, it happened in Southport in the UK. 3 young children killed senselessly for no particular reason. In some societies, in some groups, if you look at them the wrong way, they could stab you. Yeah, you bump in them, it's a reason to kill you. Merciless environment. This is the worldview. These are the things that are shaping the worldview of our young people. There are said to be 7 generations alive on earth at this moment, and all of us fit into one of those. If I had time, I would ask you, which one do you fit into? Yes? But you can see them on the screen. Different generations, and all these generations have a different worldview or look at the world differently, depending on which generation you were born. There is believed to be one day coming an Omega generation, and we know the Bible talks of the first, Jesus, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. And so, without having to go through, as you can see on the screen, they've got the different names, and they've gone to Generation Z, now they've gone to Alpha, the next one will be Beta, and so on and so on. But they believe that one day we'll get to what is the Omega generation, who will see the end of all things. I believe that we can be that Omega generation. I do. I believe that Christ could come in our time. Jesus is coming soon, the theme of your conference this weekend. We could be that Omega generation that will see the end of all things when Jesus comes and puts in his appearance. But let's talk about the Generation Z. These are the young people born between 1997 and 2012. What can we say about them? Most of them left the room to go to the youth conversation. Oh, have we lost the power? Okay. All right. So we will look at different aspects of them. That's too small for you to see, but let's look at it from here. Generation Z, or Centennials, or the iGens that they're called, they are much more tolerant of others. Yes? They are much more tolerant of different cultures and sexual orientations. They don't have the problem that some of us older folks have. They see everybody, and what's wrong with them, Mom? We just have to treat them the same. And there's a different conversation to have around about that. So they have no problem with the different sexual orientations or the different races. However, statistics show, I'm not talking about church folks here purely, that they're less likely to go to church, Generation Z. They're less likely to go to church. They're more likely to think for themselves and not believe authority figures such as the church or government. And we see this in schools. When I was younger, teachers were the font of all knowledge. And whatever the teacher said went. Now they can challenge you and say, I don't want to do that. You ask them to do something, they say, why? And if they feel like they're not going to do it, they'll get up and walk out your class. So that respect for authority is not there so much in the Generation Z. Then they're not all like that, so let me not, label them all. There's some other things in here that are not in bold. Let's move on to some of the more negative traits of the Generation Z. They're less in person and face-to-face, and their contact with others due to more time connecting via smartphones. Yeah? You might see all the young people out there talking to one another through their phones, even though they're sat right next to one another. Now, I can say I'm guilty of this. If I want my husband to do something, I'll text him. They're less likely to read books or newspapers. And they may stay up until 2 a.m. in the morning on smartphones and talking on social media. Yes? But however, they are possibly more depressed than prior generations. And you heard Pastor McIntosh talking about the work that they do in Weimar for what is probably a growing group of people being more depressed. And certainly in schools, we see this. Every school now has to have something to do with mental well-being. We have what we call mental first aiders to help the children who are depressed, self-harming, and tuning out of education. They feel more lonely and not needed, and possibly a higher suicide rate amongst Generation Z. The Bible says, "And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world for a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come." And I ask myself, if this is the generation, these are the young people who have a more secular worldview, how will the work be finished? By whom will the work be finished? And more importantly, which gospel will they be delivering? If their worldview is more secular than we have when we were growing up, or should have even now, what gospel will be being preached to all the world? Yes? David Wilkinson said this: "A watered-down gospel is no gospel at all." Is no gospel at all. I liked this saying, although it's a sad saying. A watered-down gospel may get a lot of people into the pews. And people do this. They water it down because they want people to come in. Let them come in by numbers. So we'll water it down, make it look a bit like the world, and that will bring them into the church. So we water it down, but it says a watered-down gospel may get them into the pews, but it won't get anyone to the cross, which is where we're trying to get them. So we cannot survive spiritually if the next generation has 1 foot in the world and 1 foot in the church. We cannot survive spiritually. So I ask the question, are we actually, as a church now, I'm talking about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, are we engaged in syncretism, a blending of all things that we have now formulated to make our worldview as Adventists? Mixture of secular worldview and a biblical worldview. Is that what our church is becoming? But if we don't educate our children accurately, this is what will happen. If it's not already happening already, we will have syncretism and not a biblical worldview. One man said this, is an evangelical pastor, said there is no area of life that does not have a biblical worldview attached to it. And some of us are thinking, oh, this part of my life is the secular bit, and then maybe on Sabbath we have a different part of our life. No, all of it should be we should have a biblical worldview, because the Bible should be the most important filter on our lives. Not social media, not what the TV is saying, but the Bible should be our filter on everything in our life. The Bible says this: Finally, brothers, in Philippians 4 verse 8, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on these things. But what are our children thinking on? When they're watching, when they're listening, when they're hearing things that are of a secular nature? What is shaping their worldview? The development of a child's worldview is critical because it helps determine the kind of character children will develop and the type of God they will worship and proclaim. This worldview, this character, is developed and molded by what children see, by what they hear, and what they are exposed to every day. What has the greatest impact on worldview formation today? Tomorrow, I will talk to you about this. What has the biggest impact on worldview today? We have a crisis in Adventism. I spoke about one, a worldview crisis. We also have this crisis in Adventism. For every 100 people that join our church, 43% leave. That's the statistics. It was started in 2012, but it's still the statistics. For every 100 people that join our church, 43 will leave. That's nearly 50%. Yeah? But I believe God has sent the solution. I believe that God has sent the solution. And it's why I do the job that I do. Seventh-day Adventist schools have a purpose of educating our children for eternity. So if I was to take those same statistics that you saw in the video, more than 9,500 evangelistic sites with more than 111,000 evangelists involved, teaching over 2 million potential disciples who are in attendance each and every day in over 150 countries. That's the equivalent of a typical size conference being built every day through Adventist schools. This statistic I found really interesting. This is the East Central African Division's details from their website. Anybody originating from the East Central African Division, in other words, you're Kenya, Tanzania, those countries. So they have, in the East Central African Division, they have close to 2,500 schools. In fact, I was in Tanzania in April teaching their teachers there, and in half of the country, they have 89 schools, Adventist schools. I was blown away. 89 Adventist schools in half of the country. Yeah? But this is what it says. These schools have an enrollment of about 700,000 students. And this is what surprised me. There are about 100,000 baptisms annually as a result of evangelistic and discipleship activities connected with schools. 100,000 every year? If I had 100 being baptized every year, I'd be jumping up and down. 100,000, that is the power of Adventist education. Yeah? Schools are powerful places. Here's an interesting statement by a humanist. John Dunphy says this: I am convinced that the battleground for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public classroom by teachers who correctly perceive their role as the proselytizers of a new faith. Anything the government wants us to push in society, they push it through schools. All the gender stuff being pushed through the schools. Whatever the thing is, they want the whole society to take, they put it into the curriculum and push it through the schools. And this man's recognized it. They are losing the battle in churches. particularly the Church of England. I've worked in 3 of their schools, and they are losing the battle in the churches, and so they're putting more emphasis on head teachers being religious so that they can bring back religion into the Church of England. So the Adventist education is an outreach tool, but I believe it's undervalued. We have another crisis in Adventism. The number of Seventh-day Adventist families having family worship. When the General Conference took the 5-year survey, 37% only of people having morning and evening worship as Seventh-day Adventist families. Now, I would tell you that that figure is high, because most people when they answer a survey, they answer what they think you want to say. So that figure could be as low as 25% or less, because people write what they think you want to put on the survey. 37%. So where are the children's worldview being shaped? You send your child out to school, you take them to breakfast club at 7 o'clock, you leave them in school, and then you come back and take them from the after school round about 6 o'clock. So they've been out of your house for 12 hours. And who is training up your children? Well, it should be happening in family worship. Your children sending your children to public schools, and I understand why. Then family worship is a must, because you have now got to undo what they've learned that day in school. When they come home and tell you what did they learn in school, nothing. Believe you me, they learned a whole heap, and probably a whole heap of stuff you didn't want them to know. Sister White says this: religion is to be a part of home education. I'm not talking about those who homeschool or home educators. This is everybody's home. Religion is to be a part of home education. Home religion is fearfully neglected, she says. Men and women show much more interest in foreign missions. They give liberally to them and thus seek to satisfy their conscience, thinking that they are giving to the cause of God. Their giving to the cause of God will atone for their neglect to set a right example in the home. But the home is their special field. All of us have a special field. The home is their special field, and no excuse is accepted by God for neglecting this field. Do you know what is happening with your children? How are you ensuring that they are receiving true education and that their worldview is being shaped towards eternity? Think of the boys, the young people, the Hebrew boys, Queen Esther, David, Joseph, Daniel. They didn't go to school. School was home. What happened at home shaped their worldview. And in a crisis, they were able to stand for God. Dennis Leary says this: crisis doesn't create character, it only reveals it. This one? This one? Sorry, what do you want me to do? Oh, you want to take a picture of it? Okay, sorry. Okay. All right, I'll give you a few moments. But can you see that? Some of us think that when we become in a crisis, we're going to become a Bible superhero. Well, I'm afraid it's not true. If your worldview is not shaped towards God, you will not react like a Bible character of David and Joseph and Daniel in a time of crisis. You will go to whatever your natural worldview is. No. No, and when you read the statement, it needs to be read in a context. So your question is valid, and on the third day we'll talk about a bit more about that. Yeah, because sometimes we hear the text, train up a child, and when he's old, he will not depart from it. And yet some of our children are not with us, and we know that that's what we did. What is that about? So there is a question to be asked there, but we'll address that on Monday. Is that all right? Oh, you're not going to be here on Monday. Well, the answer is no. It's not. That doesn't mean that you have neglected your child completely. This is a statement, and there's obviously a context in it. But what I wanted to say is that religion should be part of the home. Okay. So a good question to ask. Okay. So, as I said, crisis doesn't create character, it certainly reveals it. So whatever we're shaping our children in, what are they doing when they leave for university? What are they doing when they're out of our influence? If their worldview hasn't been shaped firmly, then they will go with the crowd. And this is why our worldview is so important, how we shape our children's worldview. Because our young people need to have a biblical identity. They need to know who they are in Christ. Yeah? What is what is your identity in Christ? What is your children's identity in Christ? Whatever they see of you is shaping what they see. Yeah? I always remember this saying, if you were accused of being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Yeah? Would there be enough evidence to convict you? So what is true education? I believe, as we end today's talk, teaching our children a biblical worldview. Whether that's done in school, our church schools, whether that's done in the church itself, whether that's done in the home, our responsibility as parents is to teach them a biblical and give them a biblical worldview. I want to end with a story, which I did share when I was in Ranelagh, but it's a story for me that really emphasizes why it's necessary for our children to have a biblical worldview. It's told by, this was told by, his name's just gone out of my head, it'll come to me in a moment, Pastor Mark Finley. There is an amazing example of the power of faith identity. So the Deuteronomy 6 verse 4 is known in the Jewish culture as the Shema. Shema Yisrael is a Jewish prayer that serves as a centerpiece of the morning and evening Jewish prayer services. And it says, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And as for you, you shall love the Lord of God with all your heart, with your soul, and with all your strength or your might." This was one of the first verses that a Jewish child in ancient Israel was taught as soon as he or she learned how to speak. In addition, Jewish mothers continually taught their young children to chant the Shema before going to sleep. There is an amazing example of the power of this faith identity that took place immediately after the Second World War ended in 1945. Some leading rabbis visited Christian orphanages in search of Jewish children. During the war, many Jewish parents in Europe had placed their children in Christian orphanages to save them from the Nazis. It was the hope of these parents that they would later be reunited with their children after the war. If they, the parents, did not survive, they hoped that the surviving relatives or friends would find their children. After the war, most of the priests and the nuns who ran these orphanages were unwilling to release the Jewish children back into the custody of their families. The priests and nuns often denied that they had any Jewish children in residence. During one visit, a leading rabbi asked the priest in charge of an orphanage to allow him to return in the evening when the children were going to sleep. The priest reluctantly agreed to the rabbi's request. When the rabbi returned, he entered the children's room, and as he walked through the aisles of beds, he chanted the Hebrew words of the Shema. One by one, children burst into tears and cried out, "Mama!" Many repeated the words of the Shema. The priests were caught completely by surprise. They were unable to erase these children's memories of their Jewish mothers putting them to bed every night with the Shema on their lips. The head priest had no choice but to admit that he was mistaken, and thus these lost children of Israel were able to return home to their people and to their Torah. Burned into the consciousness of these children, indelibly impressed upon their minds, were the words that confirmed their Jewish identity. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. And I ask this question: what has been burned and emblazed in the minds of our children and our young people? The future of our church depends on how we equip the next generation and how we shape and inform their worldview. From home to school to church, we must do everything to educate our children and young people to stand for truth when they are not in our influence and our supervision, whether it be at school, at university, even at work. I can't stress enough the importance of shaping our children's worldview. The Bible says, "All your children shall be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children." I ask the question again: who is training up your children? What are they being taught? Jesus is coming soon. Will your children be saved? This is a verse that I pray every morning. I will contend with those who contend with you, and your children I will save. Isaiah 49:25. It is important how we shape our children's worldview. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Very informative, enlightening, challenging. Now, I'm going to challenge you. I have in my hands 2 copies of one of the books that Lorraine quoted from, and I only have 2. So, if you want the book, I have 2 questions to ask, and if you know the answer, you can put up your hand and I'll point to you, and if you get the answer right, I can give you the book. Okay, so are you ready? Are you sure? Good. Question number 1. How many schools are there, wow, in the United Kingdom? So I saw Talent's hand go up first in the corner of my eye, so I'm going to go to Talent. In the United Kingdom, 7 is correct. Okay. Woo. Sorry. All right. So, one more. Some people are putting up their hand before I even ask the question. So the question is, what was it, the East Central African Division? Okay. As a result of our schools in Ireland, how many baptisms per year are they seeing? Do you have a copy of this book already? Okay, well, there you go. I'm sorry, we'll try and think of some other prizes for the next session, but thank you all for listening. We're going to close I don't see the other children or the young people or the prayer summit ready. So I don't know, maybe we can do a small Q&A, maybe? Is that okay? Okay. Any questions for Lorraine?
Thank you for your question. Sure. All right, so she was asked, Just ask the question again. You were asking whether, no, I can paraphrase what I think was your question, correct me if I'm wrong. So you were asking the question, if, based on the statement about neglect, does it mean that if my child has left the church or is no longer interested in God, is it because of what we have done as parents? Is it because we neglected and we spent time on other things? It is a statement, it's general, there's a context with it, of course. And my answer is not always. It is not always. I know of parents in homes where the children were raised with biblical values. But remember, God created a litany of angels, and one of them, one of his children, went off the rails. Lucifer. Yeah? In a perfect world, he went off the rails. So it is possible that you can raise your children with all the right things, with a biblical worldview, but they have freedom of choice. And sometimes the influences of the world, particularly when they go to universities where everybody's a thinker, supposedly, that's when they get challenged. And I would say to you, it is possible. I'll tell you a story. I did some work with a lady from New Zealand who was looking at learning styles. And this was just before 9/11. And she was due to go over to the US and do some work on with some of the, what we call in England, the SAS, those specialist soldiers. Because they found that some of the soldiers were being trained at the highest level. But when it came to the crisis, they froze on the spot. Or they ran off. You know, that flight or fight response. But what they found was, and we find this with teaching, when we teach, learning hasn't taken place until the child has changed their behavior. And this is what has happened with some of the soldiers. So they were trained at the highest level, but their hard wiring inside had never been changed. And that's where the problem lies. So we may raise some of our children, you know, I have 4 children. They all have very different characters. And some of them are not where I would want them to be right now. Is it because I went wrong? I do blame myself. Sometimes I look at, I'm a workaholic. Is it because I spent too much time doing my work? Is it that I spent too much time doing God's work? And that's possible. You can be doing God's work at the neglect of your own children. Sister White was also challenged with that. So the answer is no, it's not always because of neglect. Because young people, individuals, have freedom of choice. And if we don't change their hard wiring, then in a crisis, or when the mob or the crowd is going, they will follow that crowd. And I always ask young people, are you a follower or are you a leader? And too often, our people, not necessarily just children, are followers and not leaders. Whatever the majority of people are doing, they're going to follow that crowd. So you have to teach children, teach young people to stand alone. And that can be very difficult because you want to fit in with everybody else. My daughter was in a science class, and they shouldn't have been talking about this in a public school. And they were teaching about evolution. And when the teachers, for some reason, asked the question, who does not believe in evolution? My daughter flew her hand up. She didn't even look around. And when she looked around, she thought, uh-oh. Well, there was another young man, another young boy, who was also a Christian. And the two of them took on the whole class because they were firm in what they believed. But another person would have shrunk and said, uh-oh, and not said anything about it. I'll just keep quiet because it's me against 29 other children and a teacher. Yeah? So it's about hard wiring. If we don't change the hard wiring in the crisis, in that on-the-moment situation, she didn't even think about it. She flew her hand up, and she could have been on her own. So how are we changing the hard wiring of our young people? And that's why when people talk to me about education, they think I'm only coming to talk about schools. Whilst I believe that's important, Pathfinders, AYS, Children's Sabbath School, Children's Bible Study class, all of these are really important. Morning and evening worship, all of these things are what are needed to ground our children and change their hard wiring so that in a crisis they can stand up and defend truth.
I just want to say something about what I think happened to my son as well. And I feel in a way the church was guilty. Because my son is a very talented young man and he's a real natural leader. And the church put him like almost like on a pedestal. You know, like all the mothers in the church would say to me, oh, I wish that was my son. If my child could just be like that one day, then we know we would have succeeded. And he even explained to me, because after he came out and he told us everything that was going on, he said to me that there was a lot of pressure on him when he was growing up. You know what I mean? And it was like almost a perfectionism that was expected from him, you know? And that seemed to have driven him in the wrong direction. Because I have 2 adult children now, and one child is completely devoted to God. She applies her apologetics that she's learned to deal with many young people in university, and she's invited many friends to come to Christian Union, whatever. And then we have our son that's gone completely in the other direction. So
you kind of answered the question. So sometimes there's 2 things that I was warn parents of. If your child is beautiful, and some children are, they're stunningly beautiful. And sometimes as adults we say, oh, what a beautiful child, and you keep going on and on about it. All you do sometimes is put within them this kind of, well, look at me, I'm so beautiful. But equally that also happens with intelligence. And so we see children who are very bright, and people put a pressure on them that they feel they've got to live up to. And after a while they think, I just can't keep this up, and they will go against it. So sometimes that can be the pressure of everybody else. We think it's great to applaud people, and I'm not saying you shouldn't recognize people's beauty or their intelligence or their talents. You should, but you can overdo it. It can be overdone. Yeah, and that has its negative place.
Wow, thank you. You're going to be here tomorrow, and so is she, and the youth are here, and the children are here. You're not here tomorrow? Okay. Are you okay, folks, with one more question?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it's not a question. You just... Go on, Sister Joyce.
Thank you. Yeah, what I wanted to say is sometimes the parents, we have to be careful how to bring our children up with our behavior, attitude at home. Is a major problem because you shouldn't be two faces at home for your children to know. Mm-hmm. And this generation, sometimes they would tell you on your face that you're two faces. And also, not to pretend. You have to be love and kind. Let them see in you parent. I think that's the most best tool that we can use at home. Mm-hmm. Because this generation, I think I'm, what do you call it? I've been speaking a lot teenagers and the youth. I think this thing is in their mind all the time, even within the church. They can, after church, they can say this elder, this pastor, mm-hmm. this blah, blah, blah. They know everything that's going on. Mm-hmm. So we, the adults, have to be careful how we behave ourselves, church and home. Mm-hmm.
And it's a very true saying. Children see our behavior. So that you come home, you're at church and we're all smiling, then when they go home, we roast the pastor. Yeah? Or the leaders in the church. We say negative things about brother so-and-so and sister so-and-so. And our children hear it. What are we teaching them? Yeah? And you may not be speaking to them. You might be on the phone to your friend, telling them about so-and-so. Yeah? And they see that, and they believe, they see the two-facedness. Oh, they're at church pretending to be all that, and then when they go home, we're something else. Remember, children learn from what they see. Values are caught, not taught. That's how they learn. A lot of learning is from what they see and hear.
Christ